The art of storytelling dates back, at least like half a century, so you'd be forgiven for thinking that we as a species might have perfected it. Though we may yet be some way off, we have found that there are few better ways to engage your audience than making your story interactive, which is exactly what video games typically do. One of the first things they teach you in storytelling class is that a good tale generally has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Somewhere along the way, though, we invented the cliffhanger, something that the more cynical among us would probably label as a shameless attempt to force your audience to come back for more. Even so, a good cliffhanger can be a thing of beauty. However, the nature of the video game industry means that sometimes these plot threads go unresolved. Even after investing hours into a game's characters and story, the plot doesn't quite end, and we're left wondering at a resolution that will remain forever out of reach. With that in mind, and a big old spoiler warning in effect, I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 biggest unresolved cliffhangers in video games. Number 10. James Bond 007 Bloodstone. Unlike many other titles in the franchise, James Bond 007 Bloodstone was conceived as an entirely original story. A third-person shooter, Bloodstone follows MI6 agent Bond as he uncovers a complex international terrorist plot. Basically, it's every James Bond story ever told. After employing the help of fellow MI6 agent Nicole Hunter to track various mercenaries and terrorists across the world, Bond learns that his new confidant was actually a double agent all along. Pretty standard 007 stuff. However, just as Bond finally apprehends Hunter, she reveals that she was working for someone else, an unknown man of immense wealth who is supposedly more powerful than any organization in the world. Before she can reveal his identity though, she's murdered by a drone, and Bond sets off to uncover the truth. Hunter's apparent allegiance to a powerful and dangerous unknown entity was clearly a setup for a sequel, but poor sales of Bloodstone meant that these plans were unceremoniously scrapped. Even though Bloodstone was far from the most exciting Bond title, its story had promise, and that dangling plot thread now looks likely to remain unresolved forever. Entirely understandable, all things considered, but still incredibly frustrating. Number 9. Prey 2006. 2006 first-person shooter Prey was a game with an awful lot going for it. It follows a Native American mechanic named Tommy, whose world is turned upside down by the sudden appearance of aliens who abduct him, his girlfriend, and his grandfather. He frees himself from captivity and fights his way through the alien ship in hope of saving his loved ones, aided by abilities such as spirit walking and spirit bow, which allow the player to briefly step outside of Tommy's physical body. After taking on the technologically advanced aliens, the player eventually learns that the attack is being led by a telepathic creature known as the Mother of the Sphere. Luckily, Tommy manages to kill her, then send her ship flying into the sun. He returns to Earth triumphant, only to be summoned by powerful beings from elsewhere, before the words "Prey will continue" flash on screen, and the game ends. Despite the cliffhanger though, Prey did not continue. The implication was that Tommy had unwittingly made himself some sort of galactic guardian, but Prey 2, or Prey 2 if you want to get serious about this, was eventually scrapped before it ever came to fruition. Given that a new IP now exists with the same name, an answer to the original Prey's intriguing final tease seems all the more unlikely. Number 8. Echo: The Tides of Time. As one might expect for a game about a time-traveling dolphin, Echo: The Tides of Time boasts a mind-bogglingly complex story. Continuing on from Echo the Dolphin, the sequel sees Echo once more encounter the alien Vortex Queen after being transported into the distant future by his highly evolved time-traveling descendants. Echo learns that he's responsible for splitting the time stream into two possible realities, and that he must once again fight the Vortex Queen in order to set things right. God, poor Echo just can't seem to catch a break. After doing exactly what he's asked and saving the dolphins of the future, Echo decides not to destroy the time machine like he's been told, and instead uses it to travel into an unknown era. The game ends with Echo disappearing in time, and players are given a secret code, supposedly for use in the next game. The code proved useless though, because Echo's future was never revealed. Though a third Echo game was planned, Sega opted instead to make Echo Jr., a spin-off come prequel that followed the titular citizen in his younger years. Then, when Echo's story was picked back up in 2000 with Echo the Dolphin Defender of the Future, it followed an entirely different story and made no mention of the Tides of Time or its cliffhanger ending, let alone that code. God. Number 7. The Darkness 2. The Darkness 2 continues the story of Jackie Estacado, a mafia hitman who wields a supernatural power known as, surprise, the Darkness. No, not that one. He's also equipped with a pair of powerful demon arms, as well as an arsenal of weaponry that's quite standard for an FPS. The game is about as edgy as you'd expect from its name and premise, and revolves around Jackie trying to rescue the soul of his murdered girlfriend Jenny from hell, presumably because he believes in a thing called love. No, I said not that one. The Darkness 2 gives players the choice between two possible endings, both of them bleak and unsatisfying in different ways. However, the story ultimately ends with Jackie and Jenny together again, which is actually a reasonably good resolution, until the game's final scene delivers an unexpected cliffhanger. Jackie is imprisoned in hell as he's considered too powerful to be free, and the game fades out with him screaming from inside his fiery prison. In other words, it's an ending that implies Jackie's story is far from over. And maybe it wouldn't have been over if it hadn't been for the fact that The Darkness 2 was something of a financial disappointment. As much as Jackie's story was left open for continuation, The Darkness 3 has yet to come along. You might say that Jackie ended up with a one-way ticket to hell. That's another Darkness joke for you there, but it's still not that one. Number 6. Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. The Sly Cooper franchise might never have quite gained the traction it deserved, but it was still successful enough to warrant 4 games over a span of 11 years. After Sly's initial PS2 trilogy, Sly Cooper Thieves in Time was released for the PS3 and Vita, continuing the Master Thief story as he comes up against a villainous time-traveling skunk named Cyril the Paradox. The game ends up with a showdown on the Paradox's blimp, but after defeating the villain, Sly finds himself trapped on the burning aircraft. He supposedly disappears and his friends vow to find him, but that's not quite the whole story. Collecting every trophy reveals a secret ending in which Sly has managed to escape through time, waking up amongst the wreckage of the blimp in ancient Egypt. With the protagonist trapped in the past, Thieves in Time essentially ends with less of a tease of a sequel and more of a promise of one. However, with each passing year since Thieves in Time's release, a sequel seems less and less likely. In fact, developer Sanzaru Games have even gone as far as to announce that they have no plans for a 5th game, which means that Sly's story might well end on that incredibly frustrating cliffhanger. Number 5. Too Human. The story of 2008's Too Human is almost a saga worthy of the gods the game follows, as long as the gods don't mind irritatingly unresolved plot threads and a staggering number of unanswered questions, that is. Too Human reimagines Norse mythology with a liberal dose of sci-fi, and follows Balder as he protects mankind from Loki and his army of machines. Over the course of the game, Balder uncovers a conspiracy among the gods themselves involving his death and resurrection, but Too Human ends before it can be properly resolved. Then, the game shows the defeated Loki discovering a colossal titan, implying that he'll return with more powerful technology. On both fronts, Too Human dangled cliffhangers in front of the player and very much teased a sequel. That sequel was doomed to go unmade, though. It turned out that developers Silicon Knights had used a game engine without permission, and the subsequent lawsuit smote them into bankruptcy. Obviously, this swiftly killed all hope of ever getting a resolution to Two Humans' cliffhanger ending. Just goes to show that even the gods themselves can fall victim to legal disputes. Even so, it made for a disappointing end to Two Humans' promising story and unique premise. Number 4. 13. Based on a Belgian comic book and rendered in a visual style reminiscent of its original medium, 13 is undoubtedly unique. Released in 2003, the game follows an amnesiac secret agent investigating the recent assassination of the President of the United States. It's got all of the twists and turns you'd expect from such a conspiracy-heavy story, and it builds to an exciting crescendo as a nefarious plot is gradually uncovered. However, if you prefer your games to actually resolve their central mysteries, maybe 13 isn't for you. The game heavily implies that your ally, the late president's brother, was responsible for the assassination, but it stops short of fully revealing the truth. Despite spending the whole game unraveling the conspiracy, 13 doesn't quite go all the way. Instead, it drops a simple "to be continued" before the credits roll. Due to mixed reviews and poor initial sales, 13 never got a sequel. It later achieved something of a cult following, but this just made its unresolved cliffhanger ending all the more infuriating. A remake was released in 2020, but its poor reception made a sequel seem even less likely than it was before. It appears that 13-2, or 14 if you want to get incremental about this, won't be coming to finally reveal the secret that the first game held back. Number 3. Dino Crisis 2. The Dino Crisis franchise will forever stand out due to its time-bending survival horror story and the liberal dose of dinosaurs vying to devour its protagonists. The second game, Dino Crisis 2, follows operatives Regina and Dylan as they travel through time in order to recover valuable data and protect survivors of the franchise's slightly convoluted time displacement. It also turns out that Dylan's daughter Paula is among these survivors. That's important. Dino Crisis 2 ends with Paula trapped by falling equipment after an inconveniently timed earthquake. Father of the year that he is, Dylan opts to stay in the past with her and orders Regina to take the data back to the patiently waiting team of big-brain scientists who sent them there. Regina travels back to the present, vowing to find some way to rescue the two rather than leaving them stranded forever. Unlike many other titles on this list, Dino Crisis 2 did get a sequel, appropriately named Dino Crisis 3, but unfortunately it was set in the distant future and made absolutely no mention of Regina, Dylan, or Paula, meaning that we'll never truly know their ultimate fate. To be fair though, we can probably puzzle out the details. About 15 seconds after Regina left, they ended up as dino food. The end. Roll credits. Number 2. Game of Thrones. Telltale Games' foray into Westeros came at the perfect time. Game of Thrones: a Telltale Game series, to give it its full name, was released in 2014, just as the TV series was really beginning to hit its stride. It told an original story taking place alongside that of the show, and featured several familiar faces and voices to boot. Players control the members of House Forrester, who find themselves on the losing side of the War of the Five Kings depicted in the show. Because it's Game of Thrones, their misfortune is about as brutal and bloody as you'd expect. Depending on player choice, the game ends with only one of two potential characters surviving, narrowly escaping the destruction of their family home. Riding away, wounded and distraught, they vow revenge. That vow went unfulfilled though. Despite the show becoming increasingly popular in the years that followed, Telltale Games never finished development on the sequel before shutting down in 2018. Though they have since returned, Game of Thrones is no longer as culturally relevant, making a sequel far less likely. It seems that House Forrester will ultimately go unavenged, and Game of Thrones' cliffhanger ending will remain unresolved. Still, it could have ended, like this. And number 1, Half-Life 2. When it comes to unresolved video game cliffhangers, no list would be complete, indeed it would be unresolved, without Half-Life 2. It's by far the most well-known and infuriating example of this particular phenomenon, and has led to many years of pining after a promised sequel that simply doesn't seem to be on the horizon. Ending with the death of Eli Vance, the story of Half-Life 2 Episode 2 left things up in the air, much like Eli in his final moments. After Eli's death at the hands of a Combine advisor, which is basically just a fancy name for Half-Life 2's gross aliens, his daughter Alex is shown cradling his lifeless body and sobbing. And according to developer Valve, that's all she wrote, folks. Fade to black. What makes Half-Life 2's unresolved ending sting all the more, though, is just how often Valve promised a follow-up that simply didn't come. After cancelling Episode 3 and several other Half-Life projects, they did release a prequel titled Half-Life Alyx. Unfortunately, as a prequel, it didn't answer any of our dozens of burning questions. It's beginning to seem that we'll never know what happened to Alex and Gordon Freeman after Eli's death, and as such, it's not unfair to say that Half-Life 2 Episode 2 has one of the least satisfying endings in video game history.